The air in Julian Thorne's private server room was a frigid, relentless hum against my eardrums, a symphony of whirring fans and the silent, blinking dance of indicator lights. It was a sterile, unforgiving environment, a cathedral of cold, hard logic where data lived and died in a heartbeat. I had arrived early, as was my habit, before the scene could be further disturbed by the inevitable influx of officialdom. My breath plumed faintly in the super-cooled atmosphere, a stark contrast to the stifling heat that usually accompanied a crime scene. Julian Thorne lay sprawled across a raised floor panel, his body a grim, incongruous splash of organic matter in a world of polished chrome and matte black. A small, high-caliber pistol rested just beyond his outstretched fingers, glinting dully under the harsh LED lights. "Morning, Arthur." The detective, a man whose name I perpetually forgot but whose weary competence I respected, approached, his voice low, almost swallowed by the ambient drone. He gestured vaguely at the scene. Straightforward, self-inflicted, open and shut. I nodded, not in agreement, but acknowledgement. My eyes, trained to dissect and analyze, swept over the scene. The detective was right, at first glance. All the classic indicators were there: the weapon, the entry wound, the lack of struggle, the sealed environment. This wasn't just any room. It was Julian Thorne's inner sanctum, a fortress of digital and physical security. Julian Thorne, a titan of cryptocurrency, a pioneer in secure blockchain architecture, and, ironically, the architect of what was widely considered the most impenetrable smart home system ever devised. Not just his house, but his entire digital footprint, his very existence, was encased in layers of cutting-edge encryption and biometric safeguards. This server room, a smaller, more specialized extension of that ethos, was a testament to his obsession with control and privacy. "No forced entry," the detective continued, already ticking boxes in his mental ledger. "The outer data center security logs show only Thorne's access at 03:17 this morning. No one else in or out since. His personal biometric lock on this door, the one only he could open, registered his entry but no subsequent exit." He paused. "The internal environmental controls, the server monitoring, even the power grid access logs, all show no anomalies. No one else was here, Arthur. Impossible." He wasn't wrong. I knew Julian Thorne's reputation. This wasn't merely a smart home. It was a digital fortress, a smart ecosystem so complex and intertwined that it bordered on sentient. Every sensor, every camera, every access point was designed to be impervious. The thought of an intruder breaching this specific room, let alone the larger system, was absurd. It was like suggesting someone could walk through a solid wall without leaving a trace. The detective's confidence in the initial police assumption of suicide was well-founded. Yet, as I knelt, careful not to disturb anything, my gloved fingers hovering inches from the polished floor, a faint, unquantifiable unease began to prickle at the back of my neck. It wasn't a logical inconsistency I could pinpoint, not a misplaced object or an anachronistic detail. It was something far more subtle, a discordant note in the otherwise perfectly orchestrated symphony of a suicide. I looked at Thorne's face. His body was positioned oddly, almost too casual for a violent end. One arm was flung wide as if in mid-gesture, the other bent at the elbow, hand resting near his chest, close to the wound. The pistol, a sleek, almost futuristic design, lay a foot or so from his splayed fingers. It seemed too far. Not dramatically so, not enough to call it out, but just enough to nudge that feeling of unease. The ceaseless hum of the servers, typically a soothing backdrop, grated on my nerves. Every blinking light, every indicator seemed to pulse with a silent question. This room, designed for absolute control, absolute security, felt wrong. "You'll want the digital forensics from his personal devices, I imagine," the detective said, pulling me from my thoughts. "His workstation is over there, encrypted 6 ways from Sunday, I'd bet. Good luck with that." He gave a wry chuckle. "That's why I'm here." My voice a low rumble. My role, Arthur Vance, was to speak the language of the digital, to coax secrets from silicon and code, to unravel the narratives hidden within the zeros and ones. And Julian Thorne's digital life was rumored to be the most complex narrative of all. They held billions, I'd heard. Billions, secured by a man who now lay dead on his own floor. But my unease persisted, a phantom itch I couldn't scratch. The scene was too perfect, too clean, too utterly contained within Thorne's impenetrable digital and physical walls. It was a suicide note written in code, signed and sealed by a man who had built a fortress against the world. And yet, the faint, unquantifiable feeling persisted. Something was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. I just didn't know what it was yet. The detective was already making calls, briefing his superiors on the clear-cut suicide. He'd be filing the report soon, closing the case. The hum of the servers, a constant low drone, filled the sterile aisle, the blinking lights of network switches casting a cool blue-green glow over everything. Even the body. This was no morgue, no clinical setting for a post-mortem, but the grim necessity of the situation demanded an immediate on-site examination. The victim lay awkwardly, slumped against a rack of servers, the angle of his neck disturbing. The detective had pointed to the significant trauma to the back of his head, consistent with a fall from the maintenance gantry above. A tragic accident, or a desperate act, easily explained away. I knelt, my kit bag open beside me, the tools of my trade laid out. A powerful magnifying glass, fine-tipped forceps, sterile swabs, collection vials. I wasn't a medical doctor, didn't wear a white coat or carry a stethoscope. My examination began with the periphery, a systematic sweep of the scene, then a meticulous focus on the body itself. No detail was too small, no stain too faint. My initial pass confirmed the head injury, severe and likely fatal, consistent with the detective's theory. But my gaze drifted, pulled by an instinct honed over years of deciphering the language of violence. I focused on the hands, often overlooked in the rush to confirm a primary cause. The victim's fingers were loosely curled, the nails intact. But as I gently unfurled his left hand, turning it to catch the stark, unforgiving light from a server indicator, I saw them. Not obvious lacerations, not deep gashes, but a series of faint, almost imperceptible microabrasions along the inner surface of his left wrist. They were fine, almost parallel lines, barely breaking the skin, yet distinct. They weren't consistent with the impact of a fall. They spoke of friction, of restraint, of something being tightly drawn across the skin. I leaned closer, my magnifying glass pressed to the skin, the faint lines resolving into undeniable evidence. They told a different story than a simple tumble. I carefully swabbed the area, then used a sterile adhesive lift, capturing any minute fibers or skin cells. Next, I turned my attention to the head wound itself, not just the obvious impact, but the periphery. The detective had focused on the severity, the angle of impact. I focused on the texture. The wound was ragged, as expected from a fall onto a metal surface. A glint, barely visible. With painstaking care, using my finest forceps, I extracted a minute fragment. It was a fiber, impossibly thin, no more than a millimeter long. And it wasn't from the victim's clothing. Nor did it match any material from the server rack or the gantry above. Its color was an odd, almost iridescent silver blue, unlike anything in this sterile gray and black environment. It was synthetic, undeniably artificial, and it didn't belong here. It was a stranger in a familiar landscape, a detail that screamed of outside influence. I placed it carefully into a trace evidence file, sealing it with a click. Finally, I returned to the primary injury, the supposed definitive evidence of suicide. The back of the head, a massive impact. Yet, as I traced the contours of the skull, feeling for subtle changes, I found it. a secondary impact point, far more localized on the left temple. It was a small circular depression, almost perfectly round, partially obscured by the larger, more chaotic damage of the fall. This wasn't consistent with the single broad impact expected from an uncontrolled descent. This mark, subtle but distinct, suggested a prior, focused blow. It was too neat, too deliberate, to be a random secondary impact from a tumbling body. It spoke of a different force, applied with intent before the fall. The pieces clicked into place, forming a narrative far more sinister than the one the detective was so eager to write. This wasn't a suicide. This wasn't even an accident. The detective could brief his superiors all he wanted. The body, in its silent, eloquent way, was telling me a very different story. And I, Arthur Vance, was going to make sure that story was heard. The hum of the servers was a constant, low thrum against the bone, a counterpoint to the relentless blink of indicator lights that dotted the aisles like a digital constellation. Yet the images from the morgue still clung to me, particularly the micro-abrasions on the victim's wrists. Faint, almost dismissible. But in my mind, they screamed. They spoke of control, of a narrative far more intricate than the one the detective was so eager to write. My screen glowed, a portal into the victim's smart home, a digital twin meticulously replicated from its central server. My initial pass was methodical, a systematic sweep for the obvious. Door and window sensors, motion detectors, external and internal security camera feeds. I ran algorithms designed to flag anomalies, unusual power consumption spikes, unexpected network connections, even subtle changes in ambient light or sound. No forced entry, no broken glass, no uninvited guests captured on any lens. The digital perimeter was unbreached, as pristine as the physical one had appeared. This was the wall the detective had run into, the reason he'd settled for the convenient narrative. They demanded a deeper dive, a descent into the granular, the almost imperceptible. I began to filter, not for events, but for non-events. For what should have been there but wasn't, or what was there for a fleeting moment before vanishing. I stripped away the high-level security alerts and plunged into the raw sensor logs, a torrent of time-stamped data points detailing every flicker of light, every degree of temperature change, every millisecond a device was online or off, hours blurred. My eyes, accustomed to dissecting minute details, scanned lines of code, hexadecimal strings, and Boolean values until they felt gritty. The vastness of the data was overwhelming, yet I maintained my focus, driven by the conviction that the truth lay hidden in plain sight, obscured by sheer volume. I chased phantom power fluctuations through smart outlets, cross-referenced Wi-Fi connection logs with device battery levels, even analyzed the minute changes in air pressure reported by the smart thermostat. Nothing. Every door remained closed, every window sealed, every motion sensor dormant. Then, buried deep within a nested directory of environmental sensor data, I found it. It wasn't an alarm, not even a warning. It was a single anomalous entry in the log of the front door's magnetic contact sensor. Timestamp, exact date, time. Front door sensor, state, change, open. Timestamp, exact date, time, plus 0.03 seconds. Front door sensor, state, change, closed, 3 milliseconds, 0.003 of a second. The door, according to its own log, had registered as open for less time than it takes for a neuron to fire, before instantly reporting closed. It was a ghost event. A digital hiccup so brief it hadn't triggered the door's own internal logic to register a full open state, let alone send an alert to the home security system. It was a data glitch, easily dismissed, probably attributed to sensor jitter or electromagnetic interference. But I wasn't an automated system. I was Arthur Vance, and I saw patterns where machines saw noise. No security system would flag it. No human reviewing standard logs would even notice it. It was a single, microscopic tear in the fabric of an otherwise perfectly sealed digital environment. I zoomed in, cross-referencing that precise timestamp with every other sensor in the house. The hallway motion sensor just inside the door? Dormant. The camera feed covering the entrance? Unremarkable. The smart lock? Its log showed no unlock event, no manual override, no key fob activation. The ghost event was an orphan, an anomaly that defied explanation. A door doesn't just open and close in 3 milliseconds without a physical trigger. And if there was a physical trigger, why was there no corresponding log from the lock? No motion, no visual confirmation? My mind raced, connecting the impossible to the improbable. The micro-abrasions on the wrists. The seemingly impregnable smart home. And now, a 3-millisecond open event that vanished as quickly as it appeared. It wasn't a glitch. It was a signature. A signature of someone who knew this system intimately. Someone who could manipulate its very perception of reality. Or someone who could bypass it with impossible speed and precision. The detective saw a simple case of a domestic dispute gone wrong. The hum of the data center was a constant low thrum against my eardrums, a symphony of purpose and power. Rows of blinking servers, their status lights like watchful eyes, cast a faint, ethereal glow on the polished concrete floor. This was my sanctuary, a place where data spoke truths and secrets often hid in plain sight, waiting for the right interpreter. The detective, bless his straightforward heart, saw a simple case of a domestic dispute gone wrong. I saw a meticulously crafted illusion, and for the first time, a hairline fracture in its facade. That fracture had deepened into a chasm. I had spent days in a state of hyperfocus, the world outside my analysis labs blurring into irrelevance. The minuscule trace material, almost invisible to the naked eye, had been the initial enigma. The forensic lab, after an exhaustive battery of tests, had finally delivered its report. It wasn't dust, nor fibers from common household items. It was a residue, a complex synthetic lubricant, engineered for extreme conditions. Its molecular signature was unique, pointing to a highly specialized application. Arthur, the lab tech, a meticulous woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, had explained over a secure line, her voice precise. This isn't something you'd find in a garage or even most industrial settings. Its composition, particularly the inclusion of a rare earth element as a stabilizing agent, is specific. We've cross-referenced it against global databases. It's a signature component of a lubrication system used in a very select range of high-precision, high-speed industrial robotics. Think specialized manufacturing, ultra-fine tolerance machining, or advanced material processing. Extremely high-end, extremely expensive. And not something you'd ever expect to find in a suburban home, unless that home was also a covert industrial plant. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. A domestic dispute? With residue from cutting-edge industrial machinery on the victim. The narrative shattered. This wasn't just a random piece of evidence. It was a deliberate, almost taunting clue. Or perhaps an accidental transfer from a very specific environment. But the trace material was only half of the equation. The other half lay in the labyrinthine digital records of Thorne's smart home. The initial analysis had flagged a ghost event, a fleeting anomaly in the system logs, dismissed by most as a glitch, a packet drop, or a transient network hiccup. But glitches rarely left such precise, if incomplete, footprints. I had isolated the specific timestamp, drilling down through layers of encrypted data, network traffic, and system calls. The smart home's central hub, a bespoke system Thorne himself had designed, was a fortress. But even fortresses had weaknesses. What I found was not an obvious breach, no firewall alert, no unauthorized login. A sequence of micro-commands executed in rapid succession, so brief they barely registered as distinct events. They hadn't fully altered any system state that would trigger a full log entry. They were like a series of partial instructions, each one initiating a process that was then immediately aborted or redirected. But I saw the pattern. It was a sophisticated, almost artistic form of system override. Imagine a light switch that is flicked on and off so quickly that the bulb doesn't even have time to fully illuminate. But the internal circuit still registered the current. That was what I was seeing. A brief, almost undetectable surge of unauthorized control, just enough to manipulate a specific sensor or command for a fraction of a second, before retreating. No trace, no full log, just a ripple in the digital fabric. It was a digital phantom. This wasn't the work of an amateur. This was the work of someone with an intimate knowledge of Thorne's proprietary system, someone who could exploit its very architecture. It spoke of resources, expertise, and a level of sophistication that dwarfed any domestic criminal. The two pieces clicked into place with an unnerving precision. A rare, high-end industrial lubricant residue found on the victim's body, and a ghost system override in a bespoke smart home, executed with surgical precision. Neither belonged in the narrative of a simple domestic dispute. Both screamed of far more complex, calculated crime. Who would have access to such specialized industrial machinery, the kind that might utilize that particular lubricant? And who would possess the highly specialized knowledge to execute a ghost override on Thorne's cutting-edge smart home system? The answer, when it coalesced, was stark and undeniable. Thorne wasn't just a tech mogul. He was a fiercely competitive one. His company, Nexus Dynamics, was a titan in AI and automation. And like any titan, it had rivals. One rival in particular stood out: Ether Systems. They were Thorne's closest competitor, constantly vying for market share, for talent, for patents. They had the resources, the technical expertise, and certainly the motive to disrupt Thorne's life, perhaps even to eliminate him. Ether Systems was known for its aggressive R&D in robotics and advanced manufacturing. They also had a reputation for attracting some of the most brilliant and often ruthless digital architects in the industry. The kind who could build a digital ghost. The scope of the investigation had just exploded. My next step was clear. Delve deep into Ether Systems, their projects, their personnel, and their own digital footprint. The data center, once a place of quiet contemplation, now felt like a war room. The game had changed. It was no longer about a personal tragedy confined to a suburban home. It was about corporate espionage. This was the thought that echoed as Detective Miller and I stepped out of the elevator. The air immediately changed. A subtle hum vibrated through the floor, a low thrumming that spoke of immense power and constant activity. We were in the heart of Omnicore Solutions, the fierce rival of the victim's company, Anna Zara Systems. The hallway was sterile, lit by recessed LED strips that cast a cool, almost clinical glow. A security guard, whose name tag read Gary, nodded us through a reinforced door. This was the data center. Rows upon rows of server racks stretched into the distance, a metallic forest of blinking lights and coiled cables. Each rack hummed with a quiet intensity, a symphony of processors churning data. The air, meticulously climate-controlled, smelled faintly of ozone and clean metal. On polished, anti-static floors, I could see the subtle glint of fiber optic lines snaking beneath transparent covers. This wasn't just a room. It was a digital fortress. My eyes scanned the secure cages, the biometric readers, the constant surveillance cameras. This place was built to keep things in and to keep others out. Miller, ever the pragmatist, cut through the technological awe. All right, Arthur, let's see who's around. Our first stop was a small office adjacent to the main server hall, where a harried-looking IT manager, Mr. Davies, was attempting to debug a complex network issue. He seemed less than thrilled by our presence, but offered us lukewarm coffee. Omnicore and Anna, Miller began, leaning forward. They've got quite the history, don't they? Davies sighed, running a hand through thinning hair. History? It's a war. Always has been. Maya Anna spun off from Omnicore almost a decade ago. They've been trying to outmaneuver us. Patent disputes, talent poaching, undercutting bids. You name it. His voice held a bitterness that wasn't just professional. It sounded personal. They've stolen more than just clients. They've stolen our ideas, our people. I pressed, any specific instances of aggressive competition? Something beyond standard business rivalry? Davies hesitated, then lowered his voice. There was an incident maybe 3 years back, a suspected breach attempt on our internal servers. We never had concrete proof, but we all knew. He looked around conspiratorially. And then there was the Project Chimera leak, a revolutionary new encryption algorithm we were developing. Suddenly, Anna had a suspiciously similar product announced just weeks later. Coincidence? I don't think so. This was the kind of intel we needed. Miller thanked Davies, making a note. Who would have the technical expertise and perhaps the motivation to carry out such an attack from within Anna, or to facilitate it from outside? Davies thought for a moment. Well, there have been a few disgruntled types over the years. People who felt they were owed more or passed over. But one name always comes to mind when you talk about someone with the technical chops and a serious axe to grind. Julian Thorne. Thorne? I echoed. Yeah, he was a lead architect here, brilliant mind. Helped design a lot of our core infrastructure. But he had a difficult personality. Thought he was indispensable. He got fired about 2 years ago for insubordination and suspected intellectual property theft, trying to take some of our proprietary code with him when he left. We had a non-compete, and he violated it, tried to set up his own firm using our blueprints. We shut him down. He vanished after that, but not before making some pretty public threats about making us pay. Davies' eyes narrowed. He knew our systems inside and out. Knew Anna's systems too, probably, given the crossover in talent. Miller's pen flew across his notepad. Julian Thorne, can you get us his last known address, contact info? Within an hour, we had Thorne's details. He lived in a modest apartment complex across town. The detective and I drove there, the hum of the data center replaced by the urban din. Thorne was a man in his late 40s, gaunt with sharp, intelligent eyes that darted nervously. He still harbored a clear resentment towards Omnicore, confirming Davies' assessment. But when Miller brought up the timeline of the victim's death, Thorne's demeanor shifted from resentful to almost smug. "Oh, that night?" Thorne said, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I can tell you exactly where I was. I was giving a remote cybersecurity lecture for an online university, Advanced Network Forensics. It ran from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Live stream recorded, with interactive Q&A sessions where I was responding to students in real time." He gestured to a high-end webcam on his desk. "I do it every Tuesday night. Always have for the last year. It's my bread and butter now since Omnicore ruined my career." He pulled up a digital calendar on his monitor, showing the recurring event, complete with links to the university's platform. "You can check the university records, my student attendance logs, the live chat transcripts, the video archives. It's all there, detective. I was on camera, lecturing for 3 solid hours." Miller and I spent the next day meticulously verifying Thorne's alibi. The university confirmed his employment and the lecture schedule. We accessed the archived video. Thorne was indeed there, live, animated, interacting with students. We cross-referenced student login times with chat timestamps. The digital footprint was undeniable. He answered specific, complex questions from students, demonstrating a presence of mind that would be impossible to fake or pre-record without sophisticated AI, which was beyond his means and the time frame. I even checked the metadata on the video files, looking for any signs of manipulation or a loop. It was a genuine live broadcast. He was demonstrably in his apartment, engaged in a public recorded activity during the exact window of the victim's death. Miller sighed, running a hand over his face as we reviewed the final reports in his office. "Damn it, it's airtight. He's got a meticulously constructed alibi and it holds up. Every single check confirms it." I leaned back, the frustration a bitter taste in my mouth. A perfectly placed red herring then. He had the motive, the means, the knowledge, but not the opportunity. Or at least, not the direct opportunity. The corporate labyrinth had yielded a promising thread, one that felt so right, so perfectly aligned with the escalating corporate espionage angle. Yet, it had led us to a dead end. Julian Thorne was out, and the investigation, once again, felt like it was back to square one, albeit with a deeper understanding of the ruthless world the victim had navigated. We had found a culprit, only to lose him to a digital timestamp. But inspiration was exactly what I needed. Yet it didn't quite fit. Not perfectly. Thorne's death, the meticulous staging, the sheer absence of a conventional struggle. It gnawed at me. I pulled up the case files on my secure tablet, the glowing screen a stark contrast to the dim, blue-lit corridor. The air conditioning here was relentless, a constant reminder of the technological ecosystem I inhabited, and perhaps the very nature of the weapon I was hunting. Frustration, a bitter metallic taste, coated my tongue. I had focused so intently on the why that I felt I was missing the how. I scrolled back to the initial forensic reports, to the minutiae I had meticulously cataloged. First, the trace material. Microscopic. Almost dismissed as environmental detritus. A polymer complex with a unique molecular structure that had defied immediate identification. It wasn't skin, not fiber, not dust from the house. It was alien to Thorne's environment, yet undeniably present. I had theorized it might be from some specialized tool, perhaps a cutting implement used in the staging, but that assumed physical presence. Then, the sensor anomaly, a fleeting gap in the smart home security log. A mere 7 seconds, occurring precisely when the front door's magnetic sensor registered an open state, despite no corresponding activation of the motion detector in the entryway, or any visual confirmation from the external cameras. My initial thought had been a sophisticated jammer, a ghost in the machine, but it implied a person physically outside, manipulating the system. The detective had scoffed at the complexity, leaning towards a simple glitch. I hadn't. Finally, Thorne's injuries. The specific nature of them. A deep laceration, yes, but the surrounding tissue damage, the way the wound presented, had always bothered me. It wasn't a clean cut. It had elements that mimicked a struggle, a forceful application, but also an odd precision that felt almost engineered. The official ruling had leaned towards self-infliction, the desperate act of a man under immense pressure. But I saw something else, a carefully constructed illusion. I zoomed in on the trace material's spectral analysis. The polymer. I ran a cross-reference, a long shot, against known industrial composites, specialized manufacturing materials. It wasn't just a polymer. It was a device signature. But what kind of device leaves behind such a minute yet distinct residue without itself being present? Digital assets, untouchable by physical hands, yet entirely manipulable by code. That was it. Remote. I slammed my fist lightly against the cool metal of a server rack. The pieces weren't just separate clues. They were components of a single, horrifyingly elegant system. The trace material wasn't a residue from a tool that entered the house. It was a residue of a tool that projected into the house. A delivery mechanism. Not a physical object, but something that could be deployed, activated, and then retracted or dissolved, leaving only this faint, almost invisible calling card. Think of it like a highly localized, directed aerosol, or a microparticulate spray, designed to dissipate rapidly after its purpose, leaving a unique chemical signature. The sensor anomaly wasn't a jammer, nor a glitch. It was a breach. A remote intrusion into Thorne's smart home system, not to open the door for, but to create a momentary blind spot. A digital window for whatever mechanism delivered the trace material. It wasn't about entering the house physically. It was about projecting an influence into the house. And Thorne's injuries, the way they mimicked self-infliction, that precision, that engineered damage. What if the forceful application wasn't from a hand, but from a directed, localized energy source? something that could incapacitate, disorient, or even induce a specific physical reaction, making it appear as if Thorne had caused his own fatal injury. Not a laser, not a ray gun, but something that could manipulate the body's own responses, or induce a localized, precise trauma that looks self-inflicted. A focused sonic pulse? An electromagnetic field designed to disrupt neural pathways, causing a sudden, violent spasm or loss of control. Perhaps an airborne agent, precisely delivered, that causes acute disorientation and loss of motor function, leading to a fall or an accidental self-infliction of a pre-positioned blade. The synergy hit me like a physical blow. The trace material, the sensor anomaly, Thorne's injuries. They weren't disparate elements. They were the signature of a remote, highly sophisticated attack. A killer who never physically entered the house. A weapon not of steel or lead, but of directed energy or resonant frequency or localized chemical deployment, all delivered and controlled from afar. The corporate espionage angle wasn't just about data. It was about silencing people, making their deaths look like anything but murder. This wasn't a desperate act. This was a calculated clinical execution, designed to mimic suicide. The ultimate ghost in the machine. This was about finding the digital echo of a ghost and the invisible hand that wielded it. And suddenly, the data center, with its silent, humming power, felt less like a sanctuary and more like the very heart of the battlefield. This wasn't about finding a fingerprint on a weapon. My own skills, honed by years of traditional forensics, were insufficient for the spectral realm of pure data. I needed someone who spoke the language of ones and zeros with native fluency. Someone who could see the invisible. A call to an old colleague, a man who'd seen the inside of every government cybersecurity agency, led me to him. A legend, albeit an unconventional one. His name was Phineas, and he was less and more a walking, talking algorithm. He communicated mostly in a rapid-fire cadence of technical jargon, punctuated by the occasional, almost childlike gasp of discovery. He was brilliant, and, as I quickly learned, utterly immune to social norms. The air was a sterile, frigid hum, a symphony of whirring fans and the silent, ceaseless chatter of data. Somewhere among them, I knew, lay the key. Phineas, a thin man with wild, unkempt hair and spectacles perched precariously on his nose, was already there, hunched over a portable console, his fingers a blur across the keyboard. He looked up as I approached, his eyes, magnified by his glasses, glinting with an almost manic intensity. "Arthur Vance," he grunted, not a question, but a statement of recognition. "You have a ghost that talks in code." "A ghost that killed," I corrected, handing him the access logs I'd managed to secure, the ones showing the precise window of the override event. We believe the incapacitation method was digitally triggered. "I need you to trace it." He barely glanced at the printouts, his eyes already scanning the digital copies on his screen. "An override," he muttered, "designed to look like a system anomaly." Clever. They didn't just delete logs, they engineered a plausible narrative of failure. For 2 days, Phineas worked. A man possessed, fueled by lukewarm coffee and what appeared to be a single, slightly stale bagel. I watched, fascinated, as he navigated the labyrinthine networks. He wasn't merely searching, he was feeling. The data, probing for echoes, for the telltale ripples left behind by something that shouldn't have been there. He started with the ghost override itself. "It's not about what was there," he explained, his voice a low drone. "It's about what wasn't. A system this robust, this critical, has protocols for everything. An unscheduled reboot, a cascade of alerts, a silent failure? Impossible." His fingers flew, commands scrolling across his multiple screens in a rapid torrent. He delved into the deep system kernels, bypassing the superficial logs, looking for the minute changes in system states, the almost imperceptible alterations in memory allocation. The faint residual heat of a process that had been abruptly terminated and then meticulously scrubbed. Then he found it. Not a direct command, but a series of microtransactions. A fleeting, almost imperceptible handshake between an unauthorized external source and the core system. There, tapping a line of hexadecimal code. A packet injection, a digital key turning an internal lock. From there, he began to trace the digital signatures of the incapacitation method. This wasn't an EMP, he clarified, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Not a physical attack. This was a targeted software-level exploit, designed to mimic system failure but orchestrated with precision. He showed me the pattern, a unique sequence of data packets, disguised as routine maintenance signals. That had exploited a zero-day vulnerability. It was a signature, as unique as a human fingerprint, embedded in the very fabric of the system's temporary memory. The challenge was following this signature back to its origin. The attacker had used multiple layers of encryption, routing the signal through a dozen different proxies, obscuring its path with such expertise that it felt like chasing smoke. Each digital breadcrumb was encrypted, then routed, then re-encrypted, a cryptographic onion that Phineas peeled back layer by agonizing layer. He wasn't just decrypting, he was analyzing the patterns of encryption, the subtle choices in algorithms, the faint, almost subconscious tells left by the programmer. "They're good," he admitted, a rare note of respect in his voice. "Very, very good. Most would have stopped at the third hop." But Phineas didn't stop. He was looking for a pattern, a flicker of consistency in the chaos, a single, repeated digital habit. And then he found it. "Here," he announced, his voice suddenly sharp with triumph. The last hop, the origin point, or at least the last public-facing server they used to bounce the signal. I leaned in, my heart pounding. On the screen was an IP address, and beside it, a domain name. It wasn't a state-sponsored proxy. It was the server for a small local community garden project, hosting a forum for enthusiasts to discuss heirloom tomatoes and organic pest control. A seemingly innocuous, public-facing server used for an entirely unrelated purpose. It was brilliant. It was arrogant. And it was a trail. A faint, almost untraceable digital footprint, leading directly from a critical financial system to a server dedicated to cultivating vegetables. The ghost had a home, and Phineas had just given me its address. It was on the metadata, the timestamps, the subtle digital fingerprints I'd been tracing for days. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. To hide a kill switch, a digital weapon in plain sight, nestled amongst discussions of compost and blight. It was a masterstroke of misdirection. I'd seen it, or at least the digital signature of its activation, a spike in network traffic, a unique packet sequence that didn't belong. It was the moment I truly understood. This wasn't just a series of isolated events. It was a meticulously planned, deeply personal campaign. The killer hadn't just taken lives. They'd manipulated the digital fabric around them. I was close. Dangerously close. I could feel the pieces locking into place, the fuzzy edges of the puzzle snapping into a terrifyingly clear picture. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more logs, cross-referencing IP addresses, sifting through terabytes of data that would make anyone else's eyes glaze over. This was it. The thread I'd been searching for. Then, a flicker. My secondary monitor, displaying a live network map, momentarily glitched. A cascade of green lines representing active connections stuttered, then resolved. I frowned, blaming the ancient hardware, or perhaps my own fatigue. I rubbed my eyes, the fluorescent lights of the data center beginning to sting. It was well past midnight. Time to call it a night. I drove home through the deserted streets, the city a sleeping behemoth around me. Charged. I tossed my keys onto the hall table, the metallic clink echoing a little too loudly. As I walked into the living room, the smart lights, usually set to a warm, inviting glow, were a jarring, sterile white. I paused, my hand hovering over the wall switch. I hadn't touched them since this morning. "Alexa, set living room lights to cozy," I commanded, my voice flat. "Sorry, I didn't catch that," the digital assistant replied, its voice oddly distorted, like a corrupted audio file. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried again, slower, clearer. This time, the lights flickered, not to cozy, but to a rapid, unsettling strobe, before settling back on the harsh white. My stomach tightened. I walked to my kitchen, needing a coffee, something to ground me. Earl Grey tea. I despised Earl Grey. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a coincidence. I rushed to my home office, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My laptop, which I'd shut down completely, was open on the desk, the screen displaying a File Explorer window. One specific folder was highlighted. Personal Do Not Open. It contained old photographs, journals, things I'd kept hidden away for years. Accessible only through multiple layers of encryption. I hadn't looked at it in months. My breath hitched in my throat as I saw it. A single image, a candid photo of me as a child, laughing with my parents long gone standing behind me. It was an obscure file, buried deep within that folder, one I rarely looked at myself. It was now set as my desktop background. My hands trembled as I logged in, bypassing the usual fingerprint scan, which unnervingly failed 3 times before accepting my password. I opened my email client. A draft email, one I'd started weeks ago but never sent. A rambling, emotional confession to a friend about the toll this case was taking on me. Was open. The cursor blinked at the end of the last sentence I'd written. Someone had opened it. Someone had read it. The killer wasn't just aware of my progress. They were inside my life, inside my home, inside my most private thoughts. They were telling me they knew who I was, where I lived, what mattered to me. And they were telling me to stop. The stakes had just become deeply personal. I was a target, and the game had just begun. I was no longer just Arthur Vance, forensic data analyst. I was a man on the hunt, and the prey had just become very, very personal. They led not to some anonymous IP farm in a distant country, but right back into the belly of the beast. To a highly restricted, rarely accessed section of the very data center I now stood in. The air in the long, sterile aisle was a constant, frigid hum, a symphony of whirring fans and the rhythmic, almost hypnotic blink of status lights. But this wasn't where the mastermind hid. My trail pointed deeper, past layers of biometric scanners and reinforced doors, into a section marked Legacy Systems, Restricted Access, Level 5 Clearance Only. My own credentials. Stretched and bent through layers of forensic trickery, had just enough juice to get me past the final barrier. And there, hunched over a console, silhouetted against a cascade of scrolling code, was I'd been chasing. A brilliant, reclusive software engineer, just as my instincts had begun to suggest. I didn't know their name, not yet, but I knew their work. I knew the elegance of the obfuscation, the cunning of the back door, the sheer audacity of the attack. "Stop what you're doing," I said, my voice cutting through the hum. It sounded raw even to my own ears. Flinched, then slowly turned. Their eyes, magnified by thick lenses, were wide, startled. They were younger than I'd expected, perhaps late 20s, early 30s. Not a hardened criminal, but someone driven by a different kind of fire. Who are you?" they stammered, their voice thin, reedy. "Arthur Vance," I replied, stepping further into the room, letting the door hiss shut behind me. "And I know what you've done." They recoiled slightly, hands hovering over the keyboard. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you?" I took another step, my gaze sweeping over the screens. They were still running the scripts, still siphoning off data, though at a much slower pace now, a trickle compared to the flood of before. "I've been following your digital footprints for days." It's all very impressive, technically speaking. A flicker of something pride? Fear? Crossed their face. I'm just performing routine maintenance. Routine maintenance that involves framing an innocent man and destroying a company? My voice rose, the anger I'd been holding back finally breaking through. Routine maintenance that puts lives at risk? Thorne deserved it, they blurted out, then clamped their mouth shut, eyes wide with regret. The admission hung in the frigid air, thick and heavy. Deserved what? I pressed, sensing the crack in their facade. The corporate espionage angle was a brilliant misdirection, I'll give you that. It made sense, it fit the profile, but the deeper I dug, the more I saw it. The meticulous targeting of Thorne's personal files, the specific vulnerabilities you exploited that only someone with intimate knowledge of his past would even know existed. This wasn't about corporate secrets, was it? I walked closer, stopping just a few feet from their console. This was about revenge. Personal revenge. The engineers stared at me, their breath coming in shallow gasps. You don't understand. Then help me understand, I challenged. Tell me about Project Chimera. Tell me about the patent dispute from 5 years ago. Tell me about the startup that went under, leaving its founders ruined and discredited, while Thorne walked away with all the intellectual property and a multi-million-dollar buyout. Their face crumpled. He took my life's work, my partner's life's work. We poured everything into Chimera. It was going to revolutionize data encryption, make it truly uncrackable for the average user, give everyone back their privacy. Thorne. He saw the potential, offered to invest, then cut us out, smeared our names. This wasn't just a hack. It was an act of digital war, waged by a ghost from Thorne's past. And your partner? I asked, my voice softer now, but no less firm. The engineer's gaze dropped to the keyboard, their fingers trembling. They couldn't take it, the pressure, the loss. Thorne broke them, broke us both. A single tear traced a path down their cheek. I spent 5 years rebuilding, planning, learning every trick, every weakness. I wasn't just going to take his money or his data. I was going to dismantle his empire piece by piece and ensure he felt every ounce of the ruin he inflicted on us. The humming of the servers, the blinking lights, the frigid air. It all suddenly felt heavy with the weight of that confession. The stakes had indeed become deeply personal, not just for me, but for this brilliant, broken individual who had sought to deliver justice through the very systems Thorne had used to betray them. The digital trail had not just led to a mastermind, it had led to a victim, twisted by a profound and enduring injustice. The stakes had indeed escalated. The killer, Arthur Vance, had let slip a detail, a precise turn of phrase that only the guilty could know, confirming the terrible truth I had been piecing together. His eyes, though still holding a veneer of detached intellect, now carried a glint of desperation. Arthur Vance. Miller's voice cut through the drone, low and steady, a hunter's tone. It's over. Vance didn't move, not yet. Over? He scoffed, a thin smile playing on his lips. My work has just begun. Then he moved, not to run, but to engage. Instantly, the lights in our immediate aisle flickered, then dimmed to an emergency glow. A sharp, piercing alarm shrieked from a distant section of the data center. A deliberate diversion. He's trying to lock us out! Erase his tracks! I yelled, my eyes scanning the network activity indicators on a nearby screen, even in the dim light. I could see the sudden spike, a frantic outbound burst of data. He's initiating a system-wide purge. Miller, he's wiping the primary logs. Miller didn't hesitate. He lunged, but Vance was quicker, ducking behind a massive server rack. The aisles of the data center were a labyrinth of metal and wire, a perfect cover for a man who knew its every secret. He's trying to manipulate the environment, I muttered, thinking aloud. Creating chaos, buying time? A series of access panels slammed shut with metallic clangs, sealing off sections of the data center. Vance wasn't just running. He was actively fortifying his position, turning the entire facility into a weaponized maze. Miller left. He's heading for the core network hub. I pointed, my forensic mind mapping his digital moves to his physical trajectory. If he reached the hub, he could shut down the entire facility, potentially corrupting all evidence. Miller, a blur of motion, pushed through a heavy fire door that had just begun to seal. He was relentless, but Vance was an architect of this digital realm. As Miller rounded the corner, a high-pitched whine erupted, and a fine mist of inert gas began to spray from overhead vents in that section. The localized fire suppression system. "He's trying to blind you," I shouted, my throat raw. "Don't breathe it in." Miller instinctively pulled his arm over his face, but he didn't falter. He knew the risk. My eyes darted to the diagnostic screens. The system wasn't just deploying the gas, it was also rapidly dropping the temperature in that specific aisle. It was a precise, calculated move, designed to disorient and incapacitate. And then it clicked. The precisely controlled environment. The inert gas. The targeted temperature drops. It was all a signature. That's how he did it. He used this place. This exact environment. Vance now cornered in a narrow aisle lined with advanced cryostorage units, the very ones used for highly sensitive data and quantum computing components, knew he was losing. His fingers, still flying, weren't trying to escape anymore. He was targeting something specific. The final evidence. The proof. I saw it then. A small, almost imperceptible detail on one of the diagnostic screens. A single, anomalous data stream being diverted, not purged. It was a decoy, a last-ditch attempt to mislead us while he destroyed the real key. My eyes narrowed, focusing on the subtle flicker. That stream was too clean, too perfect. It was a trap. Miller, ignore the main purge. That's where he stored the real evidence, the final proof of his method. Miller, responding to my urgent tone, didn't question. He saw Vance's head snap towards the designated unit, a flicker of panic in his eyes. The detective burst forward, tackling Vance just as his fingers brushed the final key. The struggle was brief, brutal. Vance fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal, but Miller's training was superior. In moments, Vance was on the ground, his wrists secured in cuffs. The alarm slowly faded, the gas dissipated, and the emergency lights stabilized. The data center, for the first time since we arrived, felt still. I knelt beside the secured Arthur Vance, his breathing ragged. "You didn't just store data here. You stored your victim." Vance's eyes, devoid of their earlier defiance, stared blankly at the ceiling. The precise temperature control, the inert gas to prevent decomposition, the absolute isolation, I continued, the pieces locking into place with horrifying clarity. You thought the digital footprint would lead us away, but it led us right to your physical crime scene. Arthur Vance, the architect of digital empires, had turned a place of information into a tomb of ice, his ultimate act of control. Arthur Vance, standing amidst the blinking servers and humming machinery, offered no resistance. The detective's face, a mask of grim satisfaction, signaled to the uniformed officers who moved in with practiced efficiency. As they led him away, Vance's eyes, devoid of their earlier calculating glint, met mine for a fleeting moment. There was no defiance, no regret, just an empty, almost resigned recognition. Julian hadn't merely been murdered, he had been systematically dismantled. Vance, leveraging his unparalleled access and knowledge of the data center's infrastructure, had not only orchestrated the physical act, but had also initiated a sophisticated digital erasure. Julian's carefully constructed digital identity, his financial records, his communications, his very presence in the networked world, had been meticulously corrupted or expunged. The physical act, a final brutal punctuation mark, was merely the cover for a crime that began in the ethereal realm of data. Vance's motive, A blend of professional jealousy and a desire to seize control of Julian's groundbreaking algorithms was as old as humanity itself. But his method was terrifyingly modern. He had turned the very conduits of information into instruments of destruction, creating a digital ghost before extinguishing the man. The hum of the servers, once a monotonous background, now felt like a mournful drone. The case was closed, the killer identified, the motive laid bare. Julian Thorne's death wasn't just a loss of life. It was a stark warning. His life had been unmade, not by a single act of violence, but by a cascading series of digital manipulations that culminated in his physical demise. It was a profound, disquieting revelation. This case, perhaps more than any other, had fundamentally reshaped my understanding of crime. The traditional boundaries were eroding, the lines between the physical and the virtual blurring into a dangerous gray. My work, once focused on the tangible, the blood spatter, the fingerprints, the tool marks, now demanded an equally rigorous examination of the intangible. The digital forensics team, once a specialized support unit, had become indispensable, their expertise as crucial as any pathologist or ballistics expert. We were no longer just looking for physical evidence. We were hunting for digital ghosts. For the echoes of deleted files, for the faint trails left by keystrokes and data packets. The meticulous forensic work I prided myself on had expanded exponentially. It wasn't enough to secure a crime scene. We now had to secure the digital crime scene, a vast, often invisible landscape of servers, networks, and cloud storage. Every timestamp, every IP address, every line of code could be a crucial clue, a digital fiber linking perpetrator to victim. The vulnerabilities of an increasingly connected world were not just abstract concepts. They were gaping chasms through which criminals like Vance could operate, leaving behind a trail that only the most dedicated and technologically adept could hope to follow. This case had been a crucible, forging a deeper understanding of the evolving nature of my profession. In the days that followed, the administrative loose ends were tied with a methodical precision. Reports were filed, evidence cataloged, testimonies prepared. The data center, once the scene of a meticulously planned murder, gradually reverted to its intended purpose, though for me. The public, grappling with the sensational details, struggled to comprehend the depth of Vance's digital machinations, the ease with which a life could be erased in the information age. I was, undeniably, forever changed by the Thorne case. The weight of this new understanding settled deep within me, a constant reminder of the unseen battles being fought in the digital ether. My senses felt sharper, my focus more acute, attuned to the subtle interplay between the physical and the virtual. The world, once seen through a lens of tangible evidence, now shimmered with layers of digital possibility, both wondrous and terrifying. The next challenge would come, as it always did. Another victim, another perpetrator, another puzzle demanding to be solved. But I would approach it with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper appreciation for the complex, ever-evolving role of meticulous forensic work. The tools had changed, the battleground had expanded, but the fundamental pursuit of truth remained. And I, Arthur, was ready. More than ready. I was compelled.